Chapter 39. Raina. I wouldn't move, Praetor. Orion stood on the surface of the water, 50 feet to starboard, an arrow knocked in his bow. Through Raina's haze of rage and grief, she noticed the giant's new scars. His fight with the hunters had left him with mottled grey and pink scar tissue on his arms and face, so he looked like a bruised peach in the process of rotting. The mechanical eye on his left side was dark. His hair had burned away, leaving only ragged patches. His nose was swollen and red from the bowstring that Nico had snapped in his face. All of this gave Raina a twinge of dark satisfaction. Regrettably, the giant still had his smug smile. At Raina's feet, the timer on the arrow read 4:42. Explosive arrows are very touchy, said Orion. Once they're embedded, even the slightest motion can set them off. I wouldn't want you to miss the last 4 minutes of your life. Raina's senses sharpened. The Pegasi clopped nervously around the Athena Parthenos. Dawn began to break. The wind from the shore brought a faint scent of strawberries. Lying next to her on the deck, Blackjack wheezed and shuddered, still alive but badly wounded. Her heart pounded so hard she thought her eardrums might burst. She extended her strength to Blackjack, trying to keep him alive. She would not see him die. She wanted to shout insults at the giant, but her first words were surprisingly calm. What of my sister? Orion's white teeth flashed in his ruined face. I would love to tell you she is dead. I would love to see the pain on your face. Alas, as far as I know, your sister still lives. So do Thalia Grace and her annoying hunters. They surprised me, I'll admit. I was forced into the sea to escape them. For the past few days I have been wounded and in pain, healing slowly, building a new bow. But don't worry, Praetor. You will die first. Your precious statue will be burned in a great conflagration. After Gaia has risen, when the mortal world is ending, I will find your sister. I will tell her you died painfully. Then I will kill her. He grinned. So all is well. 4:04. Hilla was alive. Thalia and the hunters were still out there somewhere, but none of that would matter if Raina's mission failed. The sun was rising on the last day of the world. Blackjack's breathing became more laboured. Raina mustered her courage. The winged horse needed her. Lord Pegasus had named her horse friend, and she would not let him down. She couldn't think about the entire world right now. She had to concentrate on what was right next to her. 3:54. So, she glared at Orion. You're damaged and ugly, but not dead. I suppose that means I'll need the help of a god to kill you. Orion chuckled. Sadly, you Romans have never been very good at summoning gods to your aid. I guess they don't think much of you, eh? Raina was tempted to agree. She had prayed to her mother and been blessed with the arrival of a homicidal giant, not exactly a ringing endorsement. And yet, Raina laughed. Oh, Orion. The giant's smile wavered. You have a strange sense of humour, girl. What are you laughing about? Bellona has answered my prayer. She doesn't fight my battles for me. She doesn't guarantee me easy victory. She grants me opportunities to prove myself. She gives me strong enemies and potential allies. Orion's left eye sparked. You speak nonsense. A column of fire is about to destroy you and your precious Greek statue. No ally can help you. Your mother has abandoned you as you abandoned your legion. But she hasn't, Raina said. Bellona wasn't just a war goddess. She wasn't like the Greek Enyo, who was simply an embodiment of carnage. Bellona's temple was where Romans greeted foreign ambassadors. Wars were declared there, but peace treaties were also negotiated. Lasting peace, based on strength. 3:01. Raina drew her knife. Bellona gave me the chance to make peace with the Greeks and increase the strength of Rome. I took it. If I die, I will die defending that cause. So I saw my mother is with me today. She will add her strength to mine. Shoot your arrow, Orion. It won't matter. When I throw this blade and pierce your heart, you will die. Orion stood motionless on the waves. His face was a mask of concentration. His one good eye blinked amber. A bluff, he growled. I've killed hundreds like you, girls playing at war, pretending they are equal to giants. I will not grant you a quick death, Praetor. I will watch you burn, the way the hunters burned me. 2:31. Blackjack wheezed, kicking his legs against the deck. The sky was turning pink. A wind from the shore caught the camouflage netting on the Athena Parthenos and stripped it away, sending the silvery cloth rippling across the sound. The Athena Parthenos gleamed in the early light, and Raina thought how beautiful the goddess would look on the hill above the Greek camp. It must happen, she thought, hoping the Pegasi could sense her intentions. You must complete the journey without me. She inclined her head to the Athena Parthenos. My lady, it has been my honour to escort you. Orion scoffed. Talking to enemy statues now. Futile. You have roughly 2 minutes of life. Oh, but I don't abide by your time frame, giant. Rayna said. A Roman does not wait for death. She seeks it out and meets it at her own terms. She threw her knife. It hit true, right in the middle of the giant's chest. Orion bellowed in agony, and Rayna thought what a pleasing last sound that was to hear. She flung her cloak in front of her and fell on the explosive arrow, determined to shield Blackjack and the other Pegasi, hopefully protect the mortals sleeping below decks. She had no idea whether her body would contain the explosion, whether her cloak could smother the flames, but it was her best chance to save her friends and her mission. She tensed, waiting to die. She felt the pressure as the arrow detonated, but it wasn't what she expected. Against her ribs, the explosion made only the smallest pop, like an overinflated balloon. Her cloak became uncomfortably warm. No flames burst forth. Why was she still alive? Rise, said a voice in her head. In a trance, Rayna got to her feet. Smoke curled from the edges of her cloak. She realised something was different about the purple fabric. It glittered, as if woven through with filaments of imperial gold. At her feet, a section of the deck had been reduced to a circle of charcoal, but her cloak wasn't even singed. Accept my aegis, Rayna Ramirez Arellano, said the voice, for today you have proven yourself a hero of Olympus. Rayna stared in amazement at the Athena Parthenos, glowing with a faint golden aura. The aegis. From Rayna's years of study, she recalled that the term aegis didn't apply only to Athena's shield. It also meant the goddess's cloak. According to legend, Athena sometimes cut pieces off her mantle and draped them over statues in her temples, or over her chosen heroes to shield them. Rayna's cloak, which she'd worn for years, had suddenly changed. It had absorbed the explosion. She tried to say something, to thank the goddess, but her voice wouldn't work. The statue's glowing aura faded. The ringing in Rayna's ears cleared. She became aware of Orion, still roaring in pain as he staggered across the surface of the water. You have failed! He clawed her knife from his chest and tossed it into the waves. I still live. He drew his bow and fired, but it seemed to happen in slow motion. Rayna swept her cloak in front of her. The arrow shattered across the cloth. She charged to the railing and leapt at the giant. The jump should have been impossibly far, but Rayna felt a surge of power in her limbs, as if her mother Bellona was lending her strength. A return for all the strength Rayna had lent others over the years. Rayna grabbed the giant's bow and swung around on it, like a gymnast, landing on the giant's back. She locked her legs around his waist, then twisted her cloak into a rope and pulled it across Orion's neck with all her might. He instinctively dropped his bow. He clutched at the glimmering fabric, but his fingers steamed and blistered when he touched it. Sour, acrid smoke rose from his neck. Rayna pulled tighter. This is for Phoebe, she snarled in his ear. For Kinsey, for all those you killed. You will die at the hands of a girl. Orion thrashed and fought, but Rayna's will was unshakable. The power of Athena infused her cloak. Bellona blessed her with strength and resolve. Not one but two powerful goddesses aided her. Yet the kill was for Rayna to complete. Complete it she did. The giant crumpled to his knees and sank in the water. Rayna didn't let go until he ceased to thrash and his body dissolved into sea foam. His mechanical eye disappeared beneath the waves. His bow began to sink. Rayna let it. She had no interest in spoils of war, no desire to let any part of the giant survive. Like her father's mania and all the other angry ghosts of her past, Orion could teach her nothing. He deserved to be forgotten. Besides, dawn was breaking. Rayna swam for the yacht. Chapter 40. Rayna. No time for enjoying her victory over Orion. Blackjack's muzzle was foaming. His legs spasmed. Blood trickled from the arrow wound in his flank. Rayna ripped through the supply bag that Phoebe had given her. She swabbed the wound with healing potion. She poured unicorn draft over the blade of her silver pocket knife. Please, please, she murmured to herself. In truth, she had no idea what she was doing, but she cleaned the wound as best she could and gripped the shaft of the arrow. If it had a barbed tip, pulling it out might cause more damage. But if it was poisoned, she couldn't leave it in. Nor could she push it through, since it was embedded in the middle of his body. She would have to choose the lesser evil. This will hurt, my friend, she told Blackjack. He huffed as if to say, tell me something I don't know. With her knife, she cut a slit on either side of the wound. She pulled out the arrow. Blackjack shrieked, but the arrow came out cleanly. The point wasn't barbed. It could have been poisoned, but there was no way to be sure. One problem at a time. Rayna poured more healing potion over the wound and bandaged it. She applied pressure, counting under her breath. The oozing seemed to lessen. She trickled unicorn draft into Blackjack's mouth. She lost track of time. The horse's pulse became stronger and steadier. His eyes cleared of pain. His breathing eased. By the time Raina stood up, she was shaking with fear and exhaustion, but Blackjack was still alive. "You're going to be fine," she promised. "I'll get you help from Camp Half-Blood." Blackjack made a grumbling sound. Raina could have sworn he tried to say donuts. She must have been going delirious. Belatedly, she realised how much the sky had lightened. The Athena Parthenos gleamed in the sun. Guido and the other winged horses pawed the deck impatiently. The battle. Raina turned towards the shore, but saw no signs of combat. A Greek trireme bobbed lazily in the morning tide. The hills looked green and peaceful. For a moment she wondered if the Romans had decided not to attack. Perhaps Octavian had come to his senses. Perhaps Nico and the others had managed to win over the legion. Then an orange glow illuminated the hilltops. Multiple streaks of fire climbed skyward like burning fingers. The onagers had shot their first volley. Chapter 41. Piper. Piper wasn't surprised when the snake people arrived. All week she'd been thinking about her encounter with Skyron the Bandit, when she'd stood on the deck of the Argo II after escaping a gigantic Destructo turtle and made the mistake of saying, "We're safe." Instantly an arrow had hit the main mast, an inch in front of her nose. Piper learned a valuable lesson from that. Never assume you're safe, and never ever tempt the fates by announcing that you think you're safe. So when the ship docked at the harbour in Piraeus, on the outskirts of Athens, Piper resisted the urge to breathe a sigh of relief. Sure, they had finally reached their destination. Somewhere nearby, past those rows of cruise ships, past those hills crowded with buildings, they would find the Acropolis. Today, one way or another, their journey would end. But that didn't mean she could relax. Any moment, a nasty surprise might come flying out of nowhere. As it turned out, the surprise was 3 dudes with snake tails instead of legs. Piper was on watch while her friends geared up for combat, checking their weapons and armour, loading the ballistae and catapults. She spotted the snake guys slithering along the docks, winding through crowds of mortal tourists who paid them no attention. Annabeth, Piper called. Annabeth and Percy came to her side. "Oh, great," Percy said. "Dracanae." Annabeth narrowed her eyes. "I don't think so. At least not like I've seen. Dracanae have 2 serpent trunks for legs. These guys just have 1. "You're right," Percy said. "These look more human on top, too. Not at all scaly and greeny and stuff. So, do we talk or fight?" Piper was tempted to say fight. She couldn't help thinking of the story she'd told Jason about the Cherokee hunter who had broken his taboo and turned into a snake. These 3 looked like they'd been eating a lot of squirrel meat. Weirdly, the one in the lead reminded Piper of her dad when he'd grown a beard for his role in King of Sparta. The snake man held his head high. His face was chiselled and bronze, his eyes black as basalt, his curly dark hair glistening with oil, his upper body rippled with muscles, covered only by Greek chlamys, a white wool cloak loosely wrapped and pinned at the shoulder. From the waist down, his body was one giant serpent trunk, about 8 feet of green tail undulating behind him as he moved. In one hand he carried a staff topped with a glowing green jewel. In his other he carried a platter covered with a silver dome, like a main course for a fancy dinner. The 2 guys behind him appeared to be guards. They wore bronze breastplates and elaborate helmets topped with horsehair bristles. Their spears were tipped with green stone points. Their oval shields were emblazoned with a large Greek letter K, Kappa. They stopped a few yards from the Argo II. The leader looked up and studied the demigods. His expression was intense but inscrutable. He might have been angry or worried or terribly in need of a restroom. "Permission to come aboard." His rasping voice made Piper think of a straight razor being wiped across a strop, like in her grandfather's barber shop back in Oklahoma. "Who are you?" she asked. He fixed his dark eyes on her. "I'm Kekrops, the first and eternal king of Athens. I would welcome you to my city." He held up a covered platter. "Also, I brought a bunt cake." Piper glanced at her friends. "A trick?" "Probably," Annabeth said. "At least he brought dessert." Percy smiled down at the snake guys. "Welcome aboard." Kekrops agreed to leave his guards above deck, with Buford at the table, who ordered them to drop and give him 20 push-ups. The guards seemed to take this as a challenge. Meanwhile, the King of Athens was invited to the mess hall for a get-to-know-you meeting. "Please, take a seat," Jason offered. Kekrops wrinkled his nose. "Snake people do not sit." "Please, remain standing," Leo said. He cut the cake and stuffed a piece in his mouth before Piper could warn him it might be poisoned or inedible for mortals, or just plain bad. "Dang," he grinned. "Snake people know how to make bunt cake. Kind of orangey with a hint of honey. Needs a glass of milk." "Snake people do not drink milk," Kekrops said. "We are lactose-intolerant reptiles." "Me too," Frank said. I mean lactose intolerant, not a reptile. though I can be a reptile sometimes. Anyway, Hazel interrupted, King Cecrops, what brings you here? How did you know we'd arrived? I know everything that happens in Athens, Cecrops said. I was the city's founder, its first king, born of the earth. I am the one who judged the dispute between Athena and Poseidon, and chose Athena to be the patron of the city. No hard feelings, though, Percy muttered. Annabeth elbowed him. I've heard of you, Cecrops. You were the first to offer sacrifices to Athena. You built her first shrine on the Acropolis. Correct. Cecrops sounded bitter, like he'd regretted his decision. My people were the original Athenians, the Gemini. Like your zodiac sign? Percy asked. I'm a Leo. No, stupid, Leo said. I'm a Leo. You're Percy. Will you two stop it? Hazel chided. I think he means Gemini like doubled. Half man, half snake. That's what his people are called. He's a Geminus, singular. Yes. Cecrops leaned away from Hazel, as if she somehow offended him. Millennia ago we were driven underground by the two-legged humans, but I know the ways of the city better than any. I came to warn you. If you try to approach the Acropolis above ground, you will be destroyed. Jason stopped nibbling his cake. You mean, by you? By Porphyrion's armies, said the Snake King. The Acropolis is ringed with great siege weapons, onagers. More onagers, Frank protested. Did they have a sail on them or something? The Cyclopses, Hazel guessed. They're supplying both Octavian and the giants. Percy grunted. Like we needed more proof that Octavian is on the wrong side. This is not the only threat, Cecrops warned. The air is filled with storm spirits and griffins. All roads to the Acropolis are patrolled by the Earthborn. Frank drummed his fingers on the burnt cake cover. So what, we just give up? We've come too far for that. I offer you an alternative, said Cecrops. Underground passage to the Acropolis. For the sake of Athena, for the sake of the gods, I will help you. The back of Piper's neck tingled. She remembered what the giantess Periboia had said in her dream, that the demigods would find friends in Athens as well as enemies. Perhaps the giantess had meant Cecrops and his snake people. But there was something in Cecrops' voice that Piper didn't like. That razor against strop tone, as if he were preparing to make a sharp cut. What's the catch? She asked. Cecrops turned those inscrutable dark eyes on her. Only a small party of demigods, no more than 3, could pass undetected by the giants. Otherwise your scent would give you away. But your underground passages could lead you straight into the ruins of the Acropolis. Once there, you could disable the siege weapons by stealth and allow the rest of your crew to approach. With luck, you could take the giants by surprise. You might be able to disrupt their ceremony. Ceremony? Leo asked. Oh, like to wake Gaia? Even now it has begun, Cecrops warned. Can you not feel the earth trembling? We, the Gemini, are your best chance. Piper heard eagerness in his voice, almost hunger. Percy looked around the table. Any objections? Just a few, Jason said. We're on the enemy's doorstep. We're being asked to split up. Isn't that how people get killed in horror movies? Also, Percy said, Gaia wants us to reach the Parthenon. She wants our blood to water the stones and all that other psycho garbage. Won't we be playing right into her hands? Annabeth caught Piper's eye. She asked a silent question. What's your feeling? Piper still wasn't used to that, the way Annabeth looked to her for advice now. Ever since Sparta, they'd learned that they could tackle problems together from 2 different sides. Annabeth saw the logical thing, the tactical move. Piper had gut reactions that were anything but logical. Together, they either solved the problem twice as fast, or they hopelessly confused each other. Cecrops' offer made sense. At least it sounded like the least suicidal option. But Piper was certain the Snake King was hiding his true intentions. She just didn't know how to prove it. Then she remembered something her father had told her years ago. You were named Piper because Grandpa Tom thought you would have a powerful voice. You would learn all the Cherokee songs, even the Song of the Snakes. A myth from a totally different culture, yet here she was, facing the king of the snake people. She began to sing. Summertime, one of her dad's favourites. Cecrops stared at her in wonder. He began to sway. At first Piper was self-conscious, singing in front of all her friends and a snake guy. Her dad had always told her she had a good voice, but she didn't like to draw attention to herself. She didn't even like to participate at campfire sing-alongs. Now her words filled the mess hall. Everyone listened, transfixed. She finished the first verse. No one spoke for a count of 5. Pipes, Jason said. I had no idea. That was beautiful, Leo agreed, but maybe not, Calypso beautiful, but still. Piper kept the Snake King's gaze. What are your real intentions? To deceive you, he said in a trance, still swaying. We hope to lead you into the tunnels and destroy you. Why? Piper asked. The Earth Mother has promised us great rewards. If we spill your blood under the Parthenon, that will be sufficient to complete her awakening. But you serve Athena, Piper said. You founded her city. Cecrops made a low hiss, and in return the goddess abandoned me. Athena replaced me with a two-legged human king. She drove my daughters mad. They leapt to their deaths from the cliffs of the Acropolis. The original Athenians, the Gemini, were driven underground and forgotten. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, turned her back on us. But wisdom comes from the earth as well. We are, first and last, the children of Gaia. The Earth Mother has promised us a place in the sun of the upper world. Gaia is lying, Piper said. She intends to destroy the upper world, not give it to anyone. Cecrops bared his fangs. Then we will be no worse off than we were under the treacherous gods. He raised his staff, but Piper launched into another verse of Summertime. The Snake King's arms went limp, his eyes glassed over. Piper sang a few more lines, then she risked another question. The giant's defences, the underground passage to the Acropolis. How much of what you told us is true? All of it, Cecrops said. The Acropolis is heavily defended, just as I described. Any approach above ground would be impossible. So you could guide us through your tunnels, Piper said. That's also true. Cecrops frowned. Yes. And if you ordered your people not to attack us, she said, they would obey. Yes, but... Cecrops shuddered. Yes, they would obey. 3 of you, at most, could go without attracting the attention of the giants. Annabeth's eyes darkened. Piper, we'd be crazy to try it. He'd kill us at the first opportunity. Yes, the Snake King agreed. Only this girl's music controls me. I hate it. Please, sing some more. Piper gave him another verse. Leo got into the act. He picked up a couple of spoons and made them do high kicks on the tabletop until Hazel slapped his arm. I should go, Hazel said, if it's underground. Never, Cecrops said. A child of the underworld? My people would find your presence revolting. No charming music would keep them from slaying you. Hazel swallowed. Or I could stay here. Me and Percy, Annabeth suggested. Percy raised his hand. Just going to throw this out here again? That's exactly what Gaia wants. You and me, our blood, watering the stones, etc. I know. Annabeth's expression was grim. But it's the most logical choice. The oldest shrines on the Acropolis are dedicated to Poseidon and Athena. Cecrops, wouldn't that mask our approach? Yes, the Snake King admitted. Your scent would be difficult to discern. The ruins always radiate the power of those 2 gods. And me? Piper said at the end of her song. You'll need me to keep our friend here in line. Jason squeezed her hand. I still hate the idea of splitting up. But it's our best shot, Frank said. The 3 of them sneak in and disable the onagers, cause a distraction. Then the rest of us fly in with ballistae blazing. Yes, Cecrops said. That plan could work, if I do not kill you first. I've got an idea, Annabeth said. Frank, Hazel, Leo, let's talk. Piper, can you keep our friend musically incapacitated? Piper started a different song, Happy Trails, a silly tune her dad used to sing her whenever they left Oklahoma to return to L.A. Annabeth, Leo, Frank and Hazel left to talk strategy. Well, Percy rose and offered his hand to Jason. Until we meet again at the Acropolis, bro. I'll be the one killing giants. Chapter 42. Piper. Piper's dad used to say that being in the airport didn't count as visiting a city. Piper felt the same way about sewers. From the port to the Acropolis, she didn't see anything of Athens except dark, putrid tunnels. The snake men led them through an iron storm grate at the docks, straight into their underground lair, which smelled of rotting fish, mould and snakeskin. The atmosphere made it hard to sing about summertime and cotton and easy living, but Piper kept it up. If she stopped for longer than a minute or two, Cecrops and his guards started hissing and looking angry. I don't like this place, Annabeth murmured. Reminds me of when I was underneath Rome. Cecrops hissed with laughter. Our domain is much older, much, much older. Annabeth slipped her hand into Percy's, which made Piper feel downhearted. She wished Jason were with her. Heck, she'd even settled for Leo, though maybe she wouldn't have held his hand. Leo's hands tended to burst into flames when he was nervous. Piper's voice echoed through the tunnels. As they travelled further into the lair, more snake people gathered to hear her. Soon they had a procession following behind them, dozens of Gemini, all swaying and slithering. Piper had lived up to her granddad's prediction. She had learned the Song of the Snakes, which turned out to be a George Gershwin number from 1935. So far she had even kept the Snake King from biting, just like in the old Cherokee story. The only problem with that legend, the warrior who learned the snake song had to sacrifice his wife for the power. Piper didn't want to sacrifice anyone. The vial of physician's cure was still wrapped in its chamois cloth, tucked in her belt pouch. She hadn't had time to consult with Jason and Leo before she left. She just had to hope they would all be reunited on the hilltop before anyone needed the cure. If one of them died and she couldn't reach them. Just keep singing, she told herself. They passed through crude stone chambers littered with bones. They climbed slopes so steep and slippery it was nearly impossible to keep their footing. At one point, they passed a warm cave the size of a gymnasium, filled with snake eggs, their tops covered with a layer of silver filaments like slimy Christmas tinsel. More and more snake people joined their procession. Slithering behind her, they sounded like an army of football players shuffling with sandpaper on their cleats. Piper wondered how many Gemini lived down here. Hundreds, maybe thousands? She thought she heard her own heartbeat echoing through the corridors, getting louder and louder the deeper they went. Then she realised the persistent boom-ba-boom was all around them, resonating through the stone and the air. I wake. A woman's voice, as clear as Piper's singing. Annabeth froze. Oh, that's not good. It's like Tartarus, Percy said, his voice edgy. You remember, his heartbeat, when he appeared. Don't, Annabeth said, just don't. Sorry. In the light of his sword, Percy's face was like a large firefly, a hovering momentary smudge of brightness in the dark. The voice of Gaia spoke again, louder. At last! Piper's singing wavered. Fear washed over her, as it had in the Spartan temple, but the gods, Phobos and Deimos, were old friends to her now. She let the fear burn inside her like fuel, making her voice even stronger. She sang for the snake people, for her friends' safety. Why not for Gaia too? Finally they reached the top of the steep slope, where the path ended in a curtain of green goo. Cecrops faced the demigods. Beyond this camouflage is the Acropolis. You must remain here. I will check that your way is clear. Wait. Piper turned to address the crowd of Gemini. There is only death above. You will be safer in the tunnels. Hurry back. Forget you saw us. Protect yourselves. The fear in her voice channeled perfectly with the charm speak. The snake people, even the guards, turned and slithered into the darkness, leaving only the king. Cecrops, Piper said, you're planning to betray us as soon as you step through that goo. Yes, he agreed. I will alert the giants. They will destroy you. Then he hissed. Why did I tell you that? Listen to the heartbeat of Gaia, Piper urged. You can sense her rage, can't you? Cecrops wavered. The end of his staff glowed dimly. I can, yes. She is angry. She'll destroy everything, Piper said. She'll reduce the Acropolis to a smoking crater. Athens, your city, will be utterly destroyed, your people along with it. You believe me, don't you? I do. Whatever hatred you have for humans, for demigods, for Athena, we are the only chance to stop Gaia. So you will not betray us. For your own sake and your people, you will scout the territory and make sure the way is clear. You will say nothing to the giants. Then you will return. That is what I will do. Cecrops disappeared through the membrane of goo. Annabeth shook her head in amazement. Piper, that was incredible. We'll see if it works. Piper sat down on the cool stone floor. She figured she might as well rest while she could. The others squatted next to her. Percy handed her a canteen of water. Until she took a drink, Piper hadn't realised how dry her throat was. Thanks. Percy nodded. You think the charm will last? I'm not sure, she admitted. If Cecrops comes back in 2 minutes with an army of giants, then no. The heartbeat of Gaia echoed through the floor. Strangely, it made Piper think of the sea, how the waves boomed along the cliffs of Santa Monica back home. She wondered what her father was doing right now. It would be the middle of the night in California. Maybe he was asleep or doing a late-night TV interview. Piper hoped he was in his favourite spot, the porch off the living room, watching the moon over the Pacific, enjoying some quiet time. Piper wanted to think he was happy and content right now, in case they failed. She thought about her friends in the Aphrodite cabin at Camp Half-Blood. She thought about her cousins in Oklahoma, which was odd, since she'd never spent much time with them. She didn't even know them very well. Now she was sorry about that. She wished she'd taken more advantage of her life, appreciated things more. She would always be grateful for her family aboard the Argo too, but she had so many of her friends and relatives she wished she could see one last time. Do you guys ever think about your families? She asked. It was a silly question, especially on the cusp of a battle. Piper should have been focused on their quest, not distracting her friends. But they didn't chide her. Percy's gaze became unfocused. His lower lip quivered. My mum. I haven't seen her since Hera made me disappear. I called her from Alaska. I gave Coach Hedge some letters to deliver to her. His voice broke. She's all I've got. Her and my stepdad, Paul. And Tyson. Annabeth reminded him. And Grover, and... Yeah, of course, Percy said. Thanks, I feel much better. Piper probably shouldn't have laughed, but she was too full of nervousness and melancholy to hold it in. What about you, Annabeth? My dad, my stepmum and stepbrothers. She turned the Dracon bone blade in her lap. After all I've been through in the past year, it seems stupid that I resented them for so long. And my dad's relatives. I haven't thought about them in years. I have an uncle and cousin in Boston. Percy looked shocked. You, with the Yankees cap? You've got family in Red Sox country. Annabeth smiled weakly. I never see them. My dad and my uncle don't get along. Some old rivalry, I don't know. It's stupid what keeps people apart. Piper nodded. She wished she had the healing powers of Asclepius. She wished she could look at people and see what was hurting them, then whip out her prescription pad and make everything better. But she guessed there was a reason Zeus kept Asclepius locked away in his underground temple. Some pain shouldn't be wished away so easily. It had to be dealt with, even embraced. Without the agony of the last few months, Piper never would have found her best friends, Hazel and Annabeth. She never would have discovered her own courage. She certainly wouldn't have had the guts to sing show tunes to the snake people under Athens. At the top of the tunnel, the green membrane rippled. Piper grabbed her sword and rose, prepared for a flood of monsters. But Kerkrops emerged alone. The way is clear, he said. But hurry, the ceremony is almost complete. Pushing through a curtain of mucus was almost as fun as Piper imagined. She emerged feeling like she just rolled through a giant's nostril. Fortunately, none of the gunk stuck to her, but still her skin tingled with revulsion. Percy, Annabeth and she found themselves in a cool, damp pit that seemed to be the basement level of a temple. All around them, uneven ground stretched into darkness under a low ceiling of stone. Directly above their heads, a rectangular gap was open to the sky. Piper could see the edges of walls and the tops of columns, but no monsters. Yet. The camouflage membrane had closed behind them and blended into the ground. Piper pressed her hand against it. The area seemed to be solid rock. They wouldn't be leaving the way they'd come. Annabeth ran her hand along some marks on the ground, a jagged crow's-foot shape as long as a human body. The area was lumpy and white, like stone scar tissue. This is the place, she said. Percy, these are the trident marks of Poseidon. Hesitantly, Percy touched the scars. He must have been using his extra large trident. This is where he struck the earth, Annabeth said, where he made a saltwater spring appear when he had the contest with my mum to sponsor Athens. So, this is where the rivalry started, Percy said. Yeah. Percy pulled Annabeth close and kissed her, long enough for it to get really awkward for Piper, though she said nothing. She thought about the old rule of Aphrodite's cabin, that to be recognised as a daughter of the love goddess, you had to break someone's heart. Piper had long ago decided to change that rule. Percy and Annabeth were a perfect example of why. You should have to make someone's heart whole. That was a much better test. When Percy pulled away, Annabeth looked like a fish gasping for air. The rivalry ends here, Percy said. I love you, wise girl. Annabeth made a little sigh like something in her ribcage had melted. Percy glanced at Piper. Sorry, I had to do that. Piper grinned. How could a daughter of Aphrodite not approve? You're a great boyfriend. Annabeth made another grunt whimper. Anyway, we're beneath the Erechtheion. It's a temple to both Athena and Poseidon. The Parthenon should be diagonally to the southeast of here. We'll need to sneak around the perimeter and disable as many siege weapons as we can. Make an approach path for the Argo too. It's broad daylight, Piper said. How will we go unnoticed? Annabeth scanned the sky. That's why I made a plan with Frank and Hazel. Hopefully. Look. A bee zipped overhead. Dozens more followed. They swarmed around a column, then hovered over the opening of the pit. Say hi to Frank, everybody, Annabeth said. Piper waved. The cloud of bees zipped away. How does that even work? Percy said. Like one bee is a finger, two bees are his eyes? I don't know, Annabeth admitted, but he's our go-between. As soon as he gives Hazel the word, she will... Gah! Percy yelped. Annabeth clamped her hand over his mouth, which looked strange because suddenly each of them had turned into a hulking, six-armed earthborn. Hazel's missed. Piper's voice sounded deep and gravelly. She looked down and realised that she, too, now had a lovely Neanderthal body, belly hair, loincloth, stubby legs and oversized feet. If she concentrated, she could see her normal arms, but when she moved them, they rippled like mirages, separating into 3 different sets of muscular earthborn arms. Percy grimaced, which looked even worse on his newly uglified face. Wow, Annabeth, I'm really glad I kissed you before you changed. Thanks a lot, she said. We should get going. I'll move clockwise around the perimeter. Piper, you move counterclockwise. Percy, you scout the middle. Wait, Percy said. We're walking right into the whole blood-spilling sacrifice trap we've been warned about. And you want to split up even more? We'll cover more ground that way, Annabeth said. We have to hurry. That chanting. Piper hadn't noticed it until then, but now she heard it. An ominous drone in the distance, like 100 forklifts idling. She looked at the ground and noticed bits of gravel trembling, skittering southeast, as if pulling towards the Parthenon. Right, Piper said. We'll meet up at the giant's throne. At first it was easy. Monsters were everywhere. Hundreds of ogres, earthborn and cyclopses milling through the ruins. But most of them were gathered at the Parthenon, watching the ceremony in progress. Piper strolled along the cliffs of the Acropolis, unchallenged. Near the first onager, 3 earthborn were sunning themselves on the rocks. Piper walked right up to them and smiled. Hello? Before they could make a sound, she cut them down with her sword. All 3 melted into slag heaps. She slashed the onager's spring cord to disable the weapon, then kept moving. She was committed now. She had to do as much damage as possible before the sabotage was discovered. She skirted a patrol of cyclopses. The second onager was surrounded by an encampment of tattooed Laestrygonian ogres, but Piper managed to get the machine without raising suspicion. She dropped a vial of Greek fire in the sling. With luck, as soon as they tried to load the catapult, it would explode in their faces. She kept moving. Griffins roosted on the colonnade of an old temple. A group of Impusei had retreated into a shadowy archway and appeared to be slumbering, their fiery hair flickering dimly, their brass legs glinting. Hopefully, the sunlight would make them sluggish if they had to fight. Whenever she could, Piper slew isolated monsters. She walked past larger groups. Meanwhile, the crowd at the Parthenon grew larger. The chanting got louder. Piper couldn't see what was happening inside the ruins, just the heads of 20 or 30 giants standing in a circle, mumbling and swaying, maybe doing the evil monster version of Kumbaya. She disabled a third siege weapon by soaring through the torsion ropes, which should give the Argo II a clear approach from the north. She hoped Frank was watching her progress. She wondered how long it would take for the ship to arrive. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. A boom echoed across the hillside. In the Parthenon, the giants roared in triumph. All around Piper, monsters surged towards the sound of celebration. That couldn't be good. Piper blended into a crowd of sour-smelling earthborn. She bounded up the main steps of the temple, then climbed a section of metal scaffolding so she could see above the heads of the ogres and cyclopses. The scene in the ruins almost made her cry aloud. Before Porphyrion's throne, dozens of giants stood in a loose ring, hollering and shaking their weapons as 2 of their number paraded around the circle, showing off their prizes. The Princess Periboia held Annabeth by the neck like a feral cat. The giant Enceladus had Percy wrapped in his massive fist. Annabeth and Percy both struggled helplessly. Their captors displayed them to the cheering horde of monsters, then turned to face King Porphyrion, who sat in his makeshift throne, his white eyes gleaming with malice. Right on time, the giant king bellowed. The blood of Olympus to raise the Earth Mother. Chapter 43. Piper. Piper watched in horror as the giant king rose to his full height, almost as tall as the temple columns. His face looked just as Piper remembered, green as bile, with a twisted sneer. His seaweed-coloured hair braided with swords and axes taken from dead demigods. He loomed over the captives, watching them wriggle. They arrived just as you foresaw, Enceladus. Well done. Piper's old enemy bowed his head, braided bones clattering in his dreadlocks. It was simple, my king. The flame designs gleamed on his armour. His spear burned with purplish fire. He only needed one hand to hold his captive. Despite all of Percy Jackson's power, despite everything he had survived, in the end he was helpless against the sheer strength of the giant and the inevitability of the prophecy. I knew these 2 would lead the assault, Enceladus continued. I understand how they think. Athena and Poseidon. They were just like these children. They both came here thinking to claim this city. Their arrogance has undone them. Over the roar of the crowd, Piper could barely hear herself think, but she replayed Enceladus's words. These 2 would lead the assault. Her heart raced. The giants had expected Percy and Annabeth. They didn't expect her. For once, being Piper McLean, the daughter of Aphrodite, the one nobody took seriously, might play to her advantage. Annabeth tried to say something, but the giantess Periboia shook her by the neck. Shut up! None of your silver-tongued trickery! The princess drew a hunting knife as long as Piper's sword. Let me do the honours, father. Wait, daughter. The king stepped back. The sacrifice must be done properly. Foon, destroyer of the fates, come forward. The wizened grey giant shuffled into sight, holding an oversized meat cleaver. He fixed his milky eyes on Annabeth. Percy shouted. At the other end of the Acropolis, 100 yards away, a geyser of water shot into the sky. King Porphyrion laughed. You'll have to do better than that, son of Poseidon. The earth is too powerful here. Even your father wouldn't be able to summon more than a salty spring. But never fear, the only liquid we require from you is your blood. Piper scanned the sky desperately. Where was the Argo to? Toon knelt and touched the blade of his cleaver reverently against the earth. Mother Gaia! His voice was impossibly deep, shaking the ruins, making the metal scaffold resonate under Piper's feet. In ancient times, blood mixed with your soil to create life. Now, let the blood of these demigods return their favour. We bring you to full wakefulness. We greet you as our eternal mistress. Without thinking, Piper leapt from the scaffolding. She sailed over the heads of the Cyclopses and ogres, landed in the centre of the courtyard, and pushed her way into the circle of giants. As Toon rose to use his cleaver, Piper slashed upward with her sword. She took off Toon's hand at the wrist. The old giant wailed. The cleaver and severed hand lay in the dust at Piper's feet. She felt her mist, disguise burn away until she was just Piper again. One girl in the midst of an army of giants, her jagged bronze blade like a toothpick compared to their massive weapons. What is this? Porphyrion thundered. How dare this weak, useless creature interrupt? Piper followed her gut. She attacked. Piper's advantages. She was small, she was quick, and she was absolutely insane. She drew her knife Catoptris and threw it at Enceladus, hoping she wouldn't hit Percy by accident. She veered aside without witnessing the results, but judging from the giant's painful howl, she'd aimed well. Several giants ran at her at once. Piper dodged between their legs and let them bash their heads together. She wove through the crowd, jabbing her sword into dragon-scale feet at every opportunity and yelling, Run! Run away! To sow confusion. No, stop her! Porphyrion shouted. Kill her! A spear almost impaled her. Piper swerved and kept running. It's just like Capture the Flag, she told herself, only the enemy team is all 30 feet tall. A huge sword sliced across her path. Compared to her sparring practice with Hazel, the strike was ridiculously slow. Piper leapt over the blade and zigzagged towards Annabeth, who was still kicking and writhing in Periboya's grip. Piper had to free her friend. Unfortunately, the giantess seemed to anticipate her plan. I think not, demigod, Periboya yelled. This one bleeds. The giantess raised her knife. Piper screamed in charm speak. Miss. At the same time, Annabeth kicked up with her legs to make herself a smaller target. Periboya's knife passed beneath Annabeth's legs and stabbed the giantess's own palm. Oh! Periboya dropped. Annabeth, alive but not unscathed. The dagger had sliced a nasty gash across the back of her thigh. As Annabeth rolled away, her blood soaked into the earth. The blood of Olympus. Piper fought with dread. But she couldn't do anything about that. She had to help Annabeth. Piper lunged at the giantess. Her jagged blade suddenly felt ice cold in her hands. The surprised giantess glanced down as the sword of the Boread pierced her gut. Frost spread across her bronze breastplate. Piper yanked out her sword. The giantess toppled backwards, steaming white and frozen solid. Periboya hit the ground with a thud. My daughter! King Porphyrion levelled his spear and charged. But Percy had other ideas. Enceladus had dropped him, probably because the giant was busy staggering around with Piper's knife embedded in his forehead, ichor streaming into his eyes. Percy had no weapon. Perhaps his sword had been confiscated or lost in the fighting. But he didn't let that stop him. As the giant king ran towards Piper, Percy grabbed the tip of Porphyrion's spear and forced it down into the ground. The giant's own momentum lifted him off his feet in an unintentional pole vault manoeuvre, and he flipped over onto his back. Meanwhile, Annabeth dragged herself across the ground. Piper ran to her side. She stood over her friend, sweeping her blade back and forth to keep the giants at bay. Cold blue steam now reefed her blade. Who wants to be the next popsicle? She yelled, channeling anger into her charm speak. Who wants to go back to Tartarus? That seemed to hit a nerve. The giants shuffled uneasily, glancing at the frozen body of Periboya. And why shouldn't Piper intimidate them? Aphrodite was the most ancient Olympian, born of the sea and the blood of Uranus. She was older than Poseidon or Athena or even Zeus, and Piper was her daughter. More than that, she was a MacLean. Her father had come from nothing. Now he was well known all over the world. The MacLeans didn't retreat. Like all Cherokee, they knew how to endure suffering, keep their pride, and when necessary, fight back. This was the time to fight back. 40 feet away, Percy bent over the giant king, trying to yank a sword from the braids of his hair, but Porphyrion wasn't as stunned as he let on. Fools! Porphyrion backhanded Percy like a pesky fly. The son of Poseidon flew into a column with a sickening crunch. Porphyrion rose. These demigods cannot kill us. They do not have the help of the gods. Remember who you are. The giants closed in. A dozen spears were pointed at Piper's chest. Annabeth struggled to her feet. She retrieved Periboia's hunting knife, but she could barely stand upright, much less fight. Each time a drop of her blood hit the ground, it bubbled, turning from red to gold. Percy tried to stand, but he was obviously dazed. He wouldn't be able to defend himself. Piper's only choice was to keep the giants focused on her. Come on then, she yelled. I'll destroy you all myself if I have to. A metallic smell of storm filled the air. All the hairs on Piper's arms stood up. The thing is, said a voice from above, you don't have to. Piper's heart could have floated out of her body. At the top of the nearest colonnade stood Jason, his sword gleaming gold in the sun. Frank stood at his side, his bow ready. Hazel sat astride Arion, and who reared and whinnied in challenge. With a deafening blast, a white-hot bolt arced from the sky, straight through Jason's body as he leapt, reefed in lightning at the giant king. Chapter 44. Piper. For the next 3 minutes, life was great. So much happened at once that only an ADHD demigod could have kept track. Jason fell on King Porphyrion with such force that the giant crumpled to his knees, blasted with lightning and stabbed in the neck with a golden gladius. Frank unleashed a hail of arrows, driving back the giants nearest to Percy. The Argo too rose above the ruins, and all the ballistae and catapults fired simultaneously. Leo must have programmed the weapons with surgical precision. A wall of Greek fire roared upward all around the Parthenon. It didn't touch the interior, but in a flash most of the smaller monsters around it were incinerated. Leo's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. Surrender! You are surrounded by one spanking hot war machine. The giant Enceladus howled in outrage. Valdez! What's up, Enceladus? Leo's voice roared back. Nice dagger in your forehead. Gah! The giant pulled Catroptris out of his head. Monsters! Destroy that ship! The remaining forces tried their best. A flock of griffins rose to attack. Festus, the figurehead, blew flames and char-grilled them out of the sky. A few Earthborn launched a volley of rocks, but from the sides of the hull a dozen Archimedes spheres sprayed out, intercepting the boulders and blasting them to dust. Put some cloves on, Buford ordered. Hazel spurred Arion off the colonnade, and they leapt into battle. The 40 feet tall fall would have broken any other horse's legs, but Arion hit the ground running. Hazel zipped from giant to giant, stinging them with the blade of her spatha. With extremely bad timing, Kekrops and his snake people chose that moment to join the fight. In 4 or 5 places around the ruins, the ground turned to green goo and armed Gemini burst forth, Kekrops himself in the lead. Kill the demigods, he hissed. Kill the tricksters. Before many of his warriors could follow, Hazel pointed her blade at the nearest tunnel. The ground rumbled. All the gooey membranes popped, and the tunnels collapsed, billowing plumes of dust. Kekrops looked around at his army, now reduced to 6 guys. Sliver away, he ordered. Frank's arrows cut them down as they tried to retreat. The giantess Periboia had forward with alarming speed. She tried to grab Annabeth, but despite her bad leg, Annabeth was holding her own. She stabbed at the giantess with her own hunting knife and led her in a deadly game of tag around the throne. Percy was back on his feet, Riptide once again in his hands. He still looked dazed. His nose was bleeding, but he seemed to be standing his ground against the old giant Toon, who had somehow reattached his hand and found his meat cleaver. Piper stood back to back with Jason, fighting every giant who dared to come close. For a moment she felt elated. They were actually winning. But too soon their element of surprise faded. The giants overcame their confusion. Frank ran out of arrows. He changed into a rhinoceros and leapt into battle. But as fast as he could knock down the giants, they got up again. Their wounds seemed to be healing faster. Annabeth lost ground against Periboa. Hazel was knocked out of her saddle at 60 miles an hour. Jason summoned another lightning strike, but this time Porphyrion simply deflected it off the tip of his spear. The giants were bigger, stronger and more numerous. They couldn't be killed without the help of the gods, and they didn't seem to be tiring. The 6 demigods were forced into a defensive ring. Another volley of earthborn rocks hit the Argo too. This time, Leo couldn't return fire fast enough. Rows of oars were sheared off. The ship shuddered and tilted in the sky. Then Enceladus threw his fiery spear. It pierced the ship's hull and exploded inside, sending spouts of fire through the oar openings. An ominous black cloud billowed from the deck. The Argo, too, began to sink. "Leo!" Jason cried. Porphyrion laughed. "You demigods have learned nothing. There are no gods to aid you. We need only one more thing from you to make our victory complete." The giant king smiled expectantly. He seemed to be looking at Percy Jackson. Piper glanced over. Percy's nose was still bleeding. He seemed unaware that a trickle of blood had made its way down his face to the end of his chin. "Percy, look out!" Piper tried to say, but for once her voice failed her. A single drop of blood fell from his chin. It hit the ground beneath his feet and sizzled like water on a frying pan. The blood of Olympus watered the ancient stones. The Acropolis groaned and shifted as the Earth Mother woke. Chapter 45. Nico. About 5 miles east of camp, a black SUV was parked on the beach. They tied up the boat at a private dock. Nico helped Dakota and Layla haul Michael Cahill ashore. The big guy was still only half conscious, mumbling what Nico assumed were football calls. Red 12, right 31, hike. Then he giggled uncontrollably. "We'll leave him here," Layla said. "Just don't bind him, poor guy." "What about the car?" Dakota asked. "The keys are in the glove compartment, but, can you drive?" Layla frowned. "I thought you could drive. Aren't you 17? "I never learned," Dakota said. "I was busy." "I've got it covered," Nico promised. They both looked at him. "You're like 14, Layla said. Nico enjoyed how nervous the Romans acted around him, even though they were older and bigger and more experienced fighters. "I didn't say I would be behind the wheel." He knelt and placed his hand on the ground. He felt the nearest graves, the bones of forgotten humans buried and scattered. He searched deeper, extending his senses into the underworld. "Jules Albert, let's go." The ground split. A zombie in a ragged 19th century motoring outfit clawed his way to the surface. Layla stepped back. Dakota screamed like a kindergartner. "What is that man?" Dakota protested. "This is my driver," Nico said. "Jules Albert finished first in the Paris-Rouen motorcar race back in 1895, but he wasn't awarded the prize because his steam car used a stoker." Layla stared at him. "What are you even talking about?" "He's a restless soul, always looking for another chance to drive," Nico said. "The last few years, he's been my driver whenever I need one." "You have a zombie chauffeur," Layla said. "I call shotgun." Nico got in on the passenger side. Reluctantly, the Romans climbed in the back. One thing about Jules Albert, he never got emotional. He could sit in crosstown traffic all day without losing his patience. He was immune to road rage. He could even drive straight up to an encampment of wild centaurs and navigate through them without even getting nervous. The centaurs were like nothing Nico had ever seen. They had back ends like palominos, tattoos all over their hairy arms and chests, and bullish horns protruding from their foreheads. Nico doubted they could blend in with humans as easily as Chiron did. At least 200 were sparring restlessly with swords and spears, or roasting animal carcasses over open fires. Carnivorous centaurs, the idea made Nico shudder. Their camp spilled across the farm road that meandered around Camp Half-Blood's southeast perimeter. The SUV nudged its way through, honking when necessary. Occasionally a centaur glared through the driver's side window, saw the zombie driver, and backed away in shock. "Pluto's pauldrons," Dakota muttered. "Even more centaurs arrived overnight." "Don't make eye contact," Layla warned. "They take that as a challenge for a duel to the death." Nico stared straight ahead as the SUV pushed through. His heart was pounding, but he wasn't scared. He was angry. Octavian had surrounded Camp Half-Blood with monsters. Sure, Nico had mixed emotions about the camp. He'd felt rejected there, out of place, unwanted and unloved. But now that it was on the verge of destruction, he realised how much it meant to him. This was the last place Bianca and he had shared as a home, the only place they'd ever felt safe, even if only temporarily. They rounded a bend in the road and Nico's fists clenched. More monsters, hundreds more, dog-headed men prowled in packs, their poleaxes gleaming in the light of campfires. Beyond that milled a tribe of two-headed men dressed in rags and blankets, like homeless guys, armed with a haphazard collection of slings, clubs and metal pipes. "Octavian is an idiot," Nico hissed. "He thinks he can control these creatures." "They just kept showing up," Layla said. "Before we knew it, well, look." The Legion was arrayed at the base of Half-Blood Hill. its 5 cohorts in perfect order, its standards bright and proud. Giant eagles circled overhead. The siege weapons, 6 golden onagers the size of houses, were arrayed behind in a loose semicircle, 3 on each flank. But for all its impressive discipline, the 12th Legion looked pitifully small, a splotch of demigod valour in a sea of ravenous monsters. Nico wished he still had the sceptre of Diocletian, but he doubted a legion of dead warriors would make a dent in this army. Even the Argo II couldn't do much against this kind of strength. "I have to disable the onagers," Nico said. "We don't have much time." "You'll never get close to them," Layla warned. "Even if we get the entire 4th and 5th cohorts to follow us, the other cohorts will try to stop us, and those siege weapons are manned by Octavian's most loyal followers." "We won't get close by force," Nico agreed. "But alone, I can do it. Dakota, Layla, Jules Albert will drive you to the Legion lines. Get out, talk to your troops, convince them to follow your lead. I'll need a distraction." Dakota frowned. "All right, but I'm not hurting any of my fellow Legionnaires." "No one's asking you to," Nico growled. "But if we don't stop this war, the entire Legion will be wiped out. You said the monster tribes take insult easily?" "Yes," Dakota said. "I mean, for instance, you make any comment to those 2-headed guys about the way they smell and—" "Oh," he grinned. "If we started a brawl, by accident, of course." "I'll be counting on you," Nico said. Layla frowned. "But how will you?" "I'm going dark," Nico said, and he faded into the shadows. He thought he was prepared. He wasn't. Even after 3 days of rest and the wondrous healing properties of Coach Hedge's gooey brown gunk, Nico started to dissolve the moment he shadow jumped. His limbs turned to vapour, cold seeped into his chest, voices of spirits whispered in his ears, "Help us, remember us, join us." He hadn't realised how much he had relied on Raina. Without her strength, he felt as weak as a newborn colt, wobbling dangerously, ready to fall at every step. "No," he told himself, "I am Nico D'Angelo, son of Hades. I control the shadows. They do not control me." He stumbled back into the mortal world at the crest of Half-Blood Hill. He fell to his knees, hugging Thalia's pine tree for support. The golden fleece was no longer in its branches. The guardian dragon was gone. Perhaps they'd been moved to a safer spot with the battle so close. Nico wasn't sure, but looking down at the Roman forces arrayed outside the valley, his spirits wavered. The nearest onager was 100 yards downhill, encircled in spiked trenches and guarded by a dozen demigods. The machine was primed, ready to fire, its huge sling cupped a projectile the size of a Honda Civic, glowing with flecks of gold. With icy certainty, Nico realised that Octavian was what he was up to. The projectile was a mixture of incendiaries and imperial gold. Even a small amount of imperial gold could be incredibly volatile. Exposed to too much heat or pressure, the stuff would explode with devastating impact. And of course, it was deadly to demigods as well as monsters. If that onager scored a hit on Camp Half-Blood, anything in the blast zone would be annihilated, vaporised by the heat or disintegrated by the shrapnel. And the Romans had 6 onagers, all stocked with piles of ammunition. "Evil," Nico said. This is evil." He tried to think. Dawn was breaking. He couldn't possibly take down all 6 weapons before the attack began, even if he found the strength to shadow travel that many times. If he managed it once more, it would be a miracle. He spotted the Roman command tent, behind and to the left of the Legion. Octavian would probably be there, enjoying breakfast at a safe distance from the fighting. He wouldn't lead his troops into battle. The little scumbag would hope to destroy the Greek camp from a distance, wait for the flames to die down and then march in unopposed. Nico's throat constricted with hate. He concentrated on that tent, envisaging his next jump. If he could assassinate Octavian, that might solve the problem. The order to attack might never be given. Nico was about to attempt it, when a voice behind him said, "Nico?" He spun, his sword instantly in his hand, and almost decapitated Will Solace. "Put that down," Will hissed. "What are you doing here?" Nico was dumbstruck. Will and 2 other campers were crouched in the grass, binoculars around their necks and daggers at their side. They wore black jeans and T-shirts with black grease paint on their faces like commandos. "Me?" Nico asked. "What are you doing? Getting yourself killed?" Will scowled. "Hey, we're scouting the enemy. We took precautions." "You dressed in black," Nico noted, "with the sun coming up. You painted your face but didn't cover that mop of blonde hair. You might as well have been waving a yellow flag." Will's ears reddened. Lou Ellen wrapped some mist around us too. "Hi." The girl next to him wriggled her fingers. She looked a little flustered. "You're Nico, right? I've heard a lot about you, and this is Cecil from Hermes' cabin." Nico knelt next to them. "Did Coach Hedge make it to camp?" Lou Ellen giggled nervously. "Did he ever?" Will elbowed her. Yeah, Hedge is fine. He made it just in time for the baby's birth. The baby? Nico grinned, which hurt his face muscles. He wasn't used to making that expression. Melly and the kid are all right? Fine. A very cute little satyr boy. Will shuddered. But I delivered it. Have you ever delivered a baby? No. I had to get some fresh air. That's why I volunteered for this mission. Gods of Olympus, my hands are still shaking. See? He took Nico's hand, which sent an electric current down Nico's spine. He quickly withdrew. Whatever, he snapped. We don't have time for chit-chat. The Romans are attacking at dawn, and I've got to... We know, Will said. But if you're planning to shadow travel to that command tent, forget it. Nico glared at him. Excuse me? He expected Will to flinch or look away. Most people did, but Will's blue eyes stayed fixed on his, annoyingly determined. Coach Hedge told me all about your shadow travel. You can't. Try that again. I just did try it again, Solace. I'm fine. No, you're not. I'm a healer. I could feel the darkness in your hand as soon as I touched it. Even if you made it to that tent, you'd be in no shape to fight. But you wouldn't make it. One more slip and you won't come back. You are not shadow travelling. Doctor's orders. The camp is about to be destroyed. And we'll stop the Romans, Will said. But we'll do it our way. Lou Ellen will control the mist. We'll sneak around, do as much damage as we can to those onagers. But no shadow travel. But no! Lou Ellen's and Cecil's hands swiveled back and forth like they were watching a really intense tennis match. Nico sighed in exasperation. He hated working with other people. They were always cramping his style, making him uncomfortable. And Will Solace. Nico revised his impression on the son of Apollo. He'd always thought of Will as easygoing and laid back. Apparently, he could also be stubborn and aggravating. Nico gazed down at Camp Half-Blood, where the rest of the Greeks were preparing for war. Past the troops and Ballistae, the canoe lake glittered pink in the first light of dawn. Nico remembered the first time he'd arrived at Camp Half-Blood, crash landing in Apollo's sun car, which had been converted into a fiery school bus. He remembered Apollo, smiling and tanned and completely cool in his shades. Thalia had said, "He's hot." "He's the sun god," Percy replied. "That's not what I meant." Why was Nico thinking about that now? The random memory irritated him, made him feel jittery. He had arrived at Camp Half-Blood thanks to Apollo. Now, on what would likely be his last day at camp, he was stuck with a son of Apollo. "Whatever," Nico said, "but we have to hurry, and you'll follow my lead." "Fine," Will said. "Just don't ask me to deliver any more satyr babies and we'll get along great." Chapter 46. Nico. They made it to the first onager just as chaos broke loose in the Legion. On the far end of the line, cries went up from the 5th cohort. Legionnaires scattered and dropped their pillar. A dozen centaurs barreled through the ranks, yelling and waving their clubs, followed by a horde of two-headed men banging on trash can lids. "What's going on down there?" Lou Ellen asked. "That's my distraction," Nico said. "Come on." All the guards had clustered on the right side of the onager, trying to see what was going on down the ranks, which gave Nico and his comrades a clear shot to the left. They passed within a few feet of the nearest Roman, but the legionnaire didn't notice them. Lou Ellen's mist magic seemed to be working. They jumped the spiked trench and reached the machine. "I brought some Greek fire," Cecil whispered. "No," Nico said. "If we make the damage too obvious, we'll never get to the other ones in time. Can you recalibrate the aim, like towards the other onagers' firing lines?" Cecil grinned. "Oh, I like the way you think. They sent me because I excel at messing things up." He went to work while Nico and the others stood guard. Meanwhile, the 5th cohort was brawling with the two-headed men. The 4th cohort moved in to help. The other 3 cohorts held their positions, but the officers were having trouble keeping order. "All right," Cecil announced. "Let's move." They shuffled across the hillside towards the next onager. This time the mist didn't work so well. One of the onager guards yelled, "Hey! Got this!" Will sprinted off, which was possibly the stupidest diversion Nico could imagine, and 6 of the guards chased after him. The other Romans advanced on Nico, but Lou Ellen appeared out of the mist and yelled, "Hey! Catch!" She lobbed a white ball the size of an apple. The Roman in the middle caught it instinctively. A 20-foot sphere of powder exploded outwards. When the dust settled, all 6 Romans were squealing pink piglets. "Nice work," Nico said. Lou Ellen blushed. "Well, it's the only pig ball I have, so don't ask for an encore." Cecil pointed. "Somebody better help Will?" Even in their armour, the Romans were starting to gain on Solace. Nico cursed and raced after them. He didn't want to kill other demigods if he could avoid it. Fortunately, he didn't need to. He tripped the Roman out at the back and the others turned. Nico jumped into the crowd, kicking groins, smacking faces with the flat of his blade, bashing helmets with his pommel. In 10 seconds, the Romans all lay groaning and dazed on the ground. Will punched his shoulder. Thanks for the assist. 6 at once isn't bad. Not bad. Nico glared at him. Next time I'll just let them run you down, Solace. Ah, they'd never catch me. Cecil waved at them from the onager, signalling that his job was done. They all moved towards the 3rd siege engine. In the Legion ranks, everything was still in chaos, but the officers were starting to reassert control. The 5th and 4th cohorts regrouped, while the 2nd and 3rd acted as riot police, shoving centaurs and Saint-Lepathalia and 2-headed men back into their respective camps. The 1st cohort stood closest to the onager, a little too close for Nico's comfort, but they seemed occupied by a couple of officers parading in front of them, shouting orders. Nico hoped they could sneak up on the 3rd siege machine. One more onager redirected, and they might stand a chance. Unfortunately, the guards spotted them from 20 yards away. One yelled, "There!" Llewellyn cursed. They're expecting an attack now. The mist doesn't work well against alert enemies. Do we run? No, Nico said. Let's give them what they expect. He spread his hands. In front of the Romans, the ground erupted. 5 skeletons clawed out of the earth. Cecil and Llewellyn charged in to help. Nico tried to follow, but he would have fallen on his face if Will hadn't caught him. You idiot! Will put an arm around him. I told you no more of that underworld magic. I'm fine. Shut up, you're not. From his pocket, Will dug out a pack of gum. Nico wanted to pull away. He hated physical contact. But Will was a lot stronger than he looked. Nico found himself leaning against him, relying on his support. Take this, Will said. You want me to chew gum? It's medicinal. Should keep you alive and alert for a few more hours. Nico shoved a stick of gum into his mouth. Tastes like tar and mud. Stop complaining. Hey! Cecil limped over, looking like he'd pulled a muscle. You guys kind of missed the fight. Llewellyn followed, grinning. Behind them, all the Roman guards were tangled in a weird assortment of ropes and bones. Thanks for the skeleton, she said. Great trick. Which he won't be doing again, Will said. Nico realised he was still leaning against Will. He pushed him away and stood on his own 2 feet. I'll do what I need to. Will rolled his eyes. Fine, deaf boy. If you want to get yourself killed, do not call me deaf boy. Llewellyn cleared her throat. Guys, drop your weapons. Nico turned. The fight at the 3rd onager had not gone unnoticed. The entire 1st cohort was advancing on them, spears levelled, shields locked. In front of them marched Octavian, purple robes over his armour, imperial gold jewellery glittering on his neck and arms, and a crown of laurels on his head as if he'd already won the battle. Next to him was the Legion's standard-bearer, Jacob, holding the golden eagle, and 6 huge cynophalae, their canine teeth bared, their swords glowing red. Well, Octavian snarled, Gracchus saboteurs. He turned to his dog-headed warriors. Tear them apart. Chapter 47. Nico. Nico wasn't sure whether to kick himself or Will Solace. If he hadn't been so distracted bickering with the son of Apollo, he would never have allowed the enemy to get so close. As the dog-headed men barreled forward, Nico raised his sword. He doubted he had the strength left to win, but before he could attack them, Will let out a piercing taxicab whistle. All 6 dogmen dropped their weapons, grabbed their ears and fell down in agony. Dude! Cecil opened his mouth to pop his ears. What the actual Hades? A little warning next time? It's even worse for the dogs, Will shrugged. One of my few musical talents. I do a really awful ultrasonic whistle. Nico didn't complain. He waded through the dogmen, jabbing them with his sword. They dissolved into shadows. Octavian and the other Romans seemed too stunned to react. My elite guard! Octavian looked around for sympathy. Did you see what he did to my elite guard? Some dogs need to be put down. Nico took a step forward. Like you. For one beautiful moment, the entire 1st cohort wavered. Then they remembered themselves and levelled their pillar. You will be destroyed, Octavian shrieked. You Greci sneak around sabotaging our weapons, attacking our men. You mean the weapons you were about to fire at us? Cecil asked. And the men who were about to burn our camp to ashes? Added Llewellyn. Just like a Greek, Octavian yelled, trying to twist things around. Well, it won't work. He pointed to the nearest legionnaires. You, and you. Check all the onagers. Make sure they're operational. I want them fired simultaneously as soon as possible. Go! The 4 Romans ran. Nico tried to keep his expression neutral. Please don't check the firing trajectory, he thought. He hoped Cecil had done his work well. It was one thing to screw up a huge weapon. It was another thing to screw it up so subtly that no one noticed until it was too late. But if anyone had that skill, it would be a child of Hermes, god of trickery. Octavian marched up to Nico. To his credit, the augur didn't seem afraid, though his only weapon was a dagger. He stopped so close that Nico could see the bloodshot veins in his pale, watery eyes. His face was gaunt. His hair was the colour of overcooked spaghetti. Nico knew Octavian was a legacy, a descendant of Apollo many generations removed. Now he couldn't help thinking that Octavian looked like a watered-down, unhealthy version of Will Solis, like a photo that had been copied too many times. Whatever made a child of Apollo special, Octavian didn't have it. "Tell me, son of Pluto," the augur hissed, "why are you helping the Greeks? What have they ever done for you?" Nico was itching to stab Octavian in the chest. He'd been dreaming of that ever since Bryce Lawrence had attacked them in South Carolina, but now they were face to face. Nico hesitated. He had no doubt he could kill Octavian before the first cohort intervened, nor did Nico particularly care if he died for his actions. The trade-off would be worth it. But after what happened with Bryce, the idea of cutting down another demigod in cold blood, even Octavian, didn't sit well. Nor did it seem right to sentence Cecil, Llewellyn and Will to die with him. It doesn't seem right. Another part of him wondered, since when do I worry about what's right? "I'm helping the Greeks and the Romans," Nico said. Octavian laughed. "Don't try to con me. What have they offered you? A place in their camp? They won't honour their agreement." "I don't want a place in their camp," Nico snarled. "Or in yours. When this war is over, I'm leaving both camps for good." Will Solis made a sound like he'd been punched. "Why would you do that?" Nico scowled. "It's none of your business, but I don't belong. That's obvious. No one wants me. I'm a child of—" "Oh, please." Will sounded unusually angry. "Nobody at Camp Half-Blood ever pushed you away. You have friends, or at least people who would like to be your friend. You pushed yourself away. If you'd get your head out of that brooding cloud of yours for once." "Enough!" Octavian snapped. "D'Angelo, I can beat any offer the Greeks could make. I always thought you would make a powerful ally. I see the ruthlessness in you, and I appreciate that. I can assure you a place in New Rome. All you have to do is step aside and allow the Romans to win. The god Apollo has shown me the future." "No." Will Solis shoved Nico out of the way and got in Octavian's face. "I am a son of Apollo, you anemic loser. My father hasn't shown anyone the future because the power of prophecy isn't working. But this—" He waved loosely at the assembled legion, the hordes of monstrous armies spread across the hillside. "This is not what Apollo would want." Octavian's lip curled. "You lie. The god told me personally that I would be remembered as the saviour of Rome. I will lead the legion to victory, and I will start by—" Nico felt the sound before he heard it. Funk, 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 reverberating through the earth, like the massive gears of a drawbridge. All the onagers fired at once, and 6 golden comets billowed into the sky. "By destroying the Greeks," Octavian cried with glee, "the days of Camp Half-Blood are over." Nico couldn't think of anything more beautiful than an off-course projectile, at least not today. From the 3 sabotaged machines, the payloads veered sideways, arcing towards the barrage from the other 3 onagers. The fireballs didn't collide directly. They didn't need to. As soon as the missiles got close to one another, all 6 warheads detonated in mid-air, spraying a dome of gold and fire that sucked the oxygen right out of the sky. The heat stung Nico's face. The grass hissed, the tops of the trees steamed. But when the fireworks faded, no serious damage had been done. Octavian reacted first. He stomped his feet and yelled, "No, no, no, reload!" No one in the first cohort moved. Nico heard the tromping of boots to his right. The 5th cohort was marching towards them double time, Dakota in the lead. Further downhill, the rest of the legion was trying to form up, but the 2nd, 3rd and 4th cohorts were now surrounded by a sea of ill-tempered monstrous allies. The auxiliary forces didn't look happy about the explosion overhead. No doubt they'd been waiting for Camp Half-Blood to go up in flames so they'd get char-grilled demigod for breakfast. "Octavian," Dakota called, "we have new orders." Octavian's left eye twitched so violently it looked like it might explode. "Orders? And from whom? Not from me!" "From Raina," Dakota said, loud enough to make sure everyone in the first cohort could hear. "She's ordered us to stand down." "Raina?" Octavian laughed, though no one seemed to get the joke. "You mean the outlaw I sent you to arrest? The ex-praetor who's conspired to betray her own people with this Gracchus?" He jabbed his finger in Nico's chest. "You're taking orders from her?" The 5th cohort formed up behind their centurion, uneasily facing their comrades in the 1st. Dakota crossed his arms stubbornly. "Raina is the praetor until voted otherwise by the Senate." "This is war," Octavian yelled. "I've brought you to the brink of ultimate victory, and you want to give up? First cohort, arrest Centurion Dakota and any who stand with him. 5th cohort, remember your vows to Rome and the Legion. You will obey me. Will Solus shook his head. Don't do this, Octavian. Don't force your people to choose. This is your last chance. My last chance? Octavian grinned, madness glinting in his eyes. I will save Rome. Now, Romans, follow my orders. Arrest Dakota, destroy these Gracchus scum, and reload those onagers. What the Romans would have done left to their own devices, Nico didn't know, but he hadn't counted on the Greeks. At that moment, the entire army of Camp Half-Blood appeared on the crest of Half-Blood Hill. Clarice Larue rode in the lead on a red war chariot pulled by metal horses. 100 demigods fanned out around her, with twice that many satyrs and nature spirits led by Grover Underwood. Tyson lumbered forward with 6 other Cyclopses. Chiron stood in full white stallion mode, his bow drawn. It was an impressive sight, but all Nico could think was, no, not now. Clarice yelled, Romans, you have fired on our camp. Withdraw or be destroyed. Octavian wheeled on his troops. You see, it was a trick. They divided us so they could launch a surprise attack. Legion, canum formate, charge! Chapter 48. Nico. Nico wanted to yell, time out, hold it, freeze! But he knew it wouldn't do any good. After weeks of waiting, agonizing and steaming, the Greeks and the Romans wanted blood. Trying to stop the battle now would be like trying to push back a flood after the dam broke. Will Solus saved the day. He put his fingers in his mouth and did a taxicab whistle, even more horrible than the last. Several Greeks dropped their swords. A ripple went through the Roman line like the entire first cohort was shuddering. Don't be stupid, Will yelled. Look! He pointed to the north, and Nico grinned from ear to ear. He decided there was something more beautiful than an off-course projectile. The Athena Parthenos, gleaming in the sunrise, flying in from the coast, suspended from the tethers of 6 winged horses. Roman eagles circled but did not attack. A few of them even swooped in, grabbed the cables, and helped carry the statue. Nico didn't see Blackjack, which worried him, but Reina Ramirez Alano rode on Guido's back. Her sword was held high. Her purple cloak glittered strangely, catching the sunlight. Both armies stared, dumbfounded, as the 40-foot-tall gold and ivory statue came in for a landing. Greek demigods! Reina's voice boomed as if projected from the statue itself, like the Athena Parthenos had become a stack of concert speakers. Behold your most sacred statue, the Athena Parthenos, wrongly taken by the Romans. I return it to you now as a gesture of peace. The statue settled on the crest of the hill, about 20 feet away from Thalia's pine tree. Instantly, gold light rippled across the ground, into the valley of Camp Half-Blood, and down the opposite side through the Roman ranks. Warmth seeped into Nico's bones, a comforting, peaceful sensation he hadn't had since... we couldn't even remember. A voice inside him seemed to whisper, you are not alone. You are part of the Olympian family. The gods have not abandoned you. Romans, Reina yelled, I do this for the good of the Legion, for the good of Rome. We must stand together with our Greek brethren. Listen to her. Nico marched forward. He wasn't even sure why he did it. Why would either side listen to him? He was the worst speaker, the worst ambassador ever. Yet he strode between the battle lines, his black sword in his hand. Reina risked her life for all of you. We brought this statue halfway across the world, Roman and Greek working together, because we must join forces. Gaia is rising. If we don't work together, you will die. The voice shook the earth. Nico's feeling of peace and safety instantly vanished. Wind swept across the hillside. The ground itself became fluid and sticky, the grass pulling at Nico's boots. A futile gesture. Nico felt as if he was standing on the goddess's throat, as if the entire length of Long Island resonated with her vocal cords. But if it makes you happy, you may die together. No. Octavian scrambled backwards. No, no! He broke and ran, pushing through his own troops. Close ranks, Reina yelled. The Greeks and Romans moved together, standing shoulder to shoulder, as all around them the earth shook. Octavian's auxiliary troops surged forward, surrounding the demigods. Both camps put together were a minuscule dot in a sea of enemies. They would make their final stand on Half-Blood Hill, with the Athena Parthenos as their rallying point. But even here, they stood on enemy ground, because Gaia was the earth, and the earth was awake.